Hello everyone, welcome back to the Lyceum podcast. I'm your host as usual, Riyad Hassib. As you can tell, there's no guest today. It's just me, myself and I. Why? Because there's just a few things I want to get off my chest and kind of speak to you directly and not share the fruits of contemplation with others around me, but hopefully with you guys. And before I jump into it, make sure you like, subscribe and comment and show love because I'm dedicated for this and I'm ready to give you great content. So, A Brave New World by Aldous Huxley was written in 1932 and published also in 1932. I think, in my opinion, it's a book with great prophetic prophecies. It's essentially a dystopian novel. And what does a dystopian novel mean? Well, when we think of utopian, a utopian is in essence a perfect society. So one could think of heaven, how a socialist would determine a society of equality amongst all is a utopian mindset, a world of no pain and suffering, But a dystopian, in other words, is the opposite, a world where you wouldn't want to live in, a world with pain and suffering, and a society that, from an objective view, is something you wouldn't want to be a part of. Notable novels are 1984, Handmaid's Tale, We by Zamiatin. These kind of novels are always a great way to, warn the future, kind of throw its javelin into the future and see who picks it up. These are kind of what dystopian novels do. And recently, if you are following me on Instagram or TikTok at the Lyceum podcast, you would see by now that I'm a bit of an advocate reader. And recently, I've actually decided to pick up A Brave New World by Aldous Huxley, written in 1932 and published then too. Now, this book was phenomenal, very prophetic indeed. Many scenes and conversations and dialogues were smacking me in the face, left, right and centre, making me think about life in all ways. And today, I don't really want to talk about Aldous Huxley as the man or A Brave New World as a whole. Why? Because first of all, I don't want to talk about Huxley because I think too many times we separate the art from the artist. And if you want to learn about Huxley, go on YouTube, click off this video, type Huxley. You'll get much better content than here if you want to learn about the artist, his life, his motivations, his ambitions. And if you want to learn about the book as a whole, read it. Don't watch no YouTube videos, read it. But today there's something I want to discuss, and there was an integral scene in the book that really made me think about life in a very, how can one say, it made me look at the ceiling for a long time, in other words. Let's put it that way. As I was alluding to before, there is a scene where a university students are being torn around and they're shown how this government educates children. And kind of very similar energy today, where a lot of our education system is top down. It's the authorities, it's a centralized government that determine what we learn on our curriculums. And that's echoed in A Brave New World almost 90 to 100 years prior. And there's a scene where a few toddlers are being conditioned, or they are predetermining their aesthetic taste, okay? And how would they do this? The toddlers essentially are handed flowers and books, and when they go to the flowers and the books, they're mildly electrocuted. You see the connection now. When they go to the flowers, nature, they go to the books, knowledge, wisdom, they're electrocuted. Thus, so when they grow up, they always associate pain with flowers and pain and discomfort with books. Isn't that interesting? And why? Because if you keep the kids away from books and knowledge and wisdom, you determine how they think. You determine their tastes in life. You determine their interests. You make them better consumers. Because isn't it funny that the more someone consumes, the less knowledgeable they tend to be? Only wisdom can stop yourself from consuming so much. That's why they say pigs can't look up, because they're so focused at looking down, they never get to look up. They're always in a state of consumeration. And now, you're probably thinking, why flowers? Why are they being told to, why are they being electrocuted with flowers? Well, that's a very interesting question. And it's a question that pondered in my head for some time. And we associate flowers with emotion, a rose, a tulip, a sunflower with power and strength. Flowers represent nature. They represent human connection. What's a flower? I give you a flower. That's a connection. It's compassion. When someone's ill in hospital, we give them flowers, right? When someone if you go to someone's house and it's bland and boring and you go, you know what, you should have some flowers in here. It creates beauty. But why condition toddlers not to like these things? Well, discomfort with flowers means discomfort with relationships. If they can be discomforted by love, then they won't achieve love. That's the breaking of the family, in essentially. And no family, easier to indoctrinate, you know? It's easier to hammer one individual than 4 individuals put together, essentially. But how does this all relate? Well, as a teacher, in the modern day, 2024, I see that a lot of people growing up, especially my age, I'm 24 now, many people my age, I talk to them, read a book. No, I can't read a book, it's boring. Why don't you go walk out in nature? Oh man, it's dangerous, it's not safe. Wow, I think Huxley was onto something. School, in a way, conditions you to find books, poetry, the arts, philosophy, God, religion as boring, discomforting, mundane, bland, not worth your time. How is it a 12-year-old is given Shakespeare at 12, 13, 14? Do you think a 12-year-old could really conceptualize and understand the hate, love, death, fate, manipulation, political tension? Why are they giving it at 12 or 13 to 14 years old? It's because they want you to grow up associating with deep philosophical texts that can help liberate the human being from their pain and suffering with mundaneness and boringness, you know? Because at 25, 26, 27, 28, if I say Shakespeare, you think boring. If I say philosophy, you say boring. How is it philosophy is a subject that is so full of rich beauty and wisdom and intellectual aesthetic is determined as boring? Well, I think the boring is the modern day electrocution. I think if we give students a lesson based on how boring, if we give a lesson on Shakespeare and make sure it's taught so boring, they'll never return to Shakespeare. They'll never determine what the idea of, they'll never think what fate could be, how one could live a life as beautiful as that, you know? What could the individual do? It's sad to see, and especially with my students. I say to them, read a book. Oh, sir, it's boring. Especially when you give them the alternative option of the iPad, the DS, not DS, that's my time, the Switch, the Xbox, okay? Now, flowers. Well, you're probably thinking, okay, books, Riyadh, I can see. But flowers, I don't know how I've been conditioned not to like flowers. Don't think you're so wise. And if you do think you're wise, make sure you're unwise. That's the wisest thing to do. God, that's a tongue twister. Anyway, what do we do with nature nowadays with our kids? It's not safe to explore forests. It's dangerous to wander around in nature. Don't go into the fields. Don't do these things. Nature's become something we should fear instead of embrace anymore. Nature, when a child used to play through nature, as many of your parents or grandparents would say, was natural. It was beautiful for a child to do that. It inspires a sense of wonder, a sense of connection with nature, you know, because in nature you find yourself. But if you go, it's don't do this now, can't do that because of this threat and because of this threat. Because why? Because Netflix shows you just documentaries on someone getting killed in a field. You'll see news headlines of some child being kidnapped in a forest. You'll see countless things to inspire fear, or in other words, as Huxley would say, electrocute you, make you associate nature, the forests, beauty and with discomfort and pain. When I say wander in the forest by yourself, you instantly think of what could go wrong? What could happen to me? You've been conditioned this way. Like, for example, the famous Madeleine McCann story in England for like the last, 15 to 20 years she's been missing. It's really left a electrocution in the minds of parents that the fact that they let their child out and go wander amongst nature, the worst could happen. That means now the parents control over the child. The parent decides whether the child can go and not go because of fear. And now if you put fear into the hearts of and minds of parents, it will come into the children. Children's children, children's children, children's children. Now you've inspired generational fear. That means if my mum didn't read books, my mum didn't go wander around nature, my dad didn't do that stuff, I don't need to. And essentially what I'm maybe trying to argue is that we must break the cycle. And now what is the consequences of this? I would say the mental health depression epidemic coming up, or that's coming on right now, is because children lack arts. They lack the philosophical inquiry into life. The literature, thousands and thousands and thousands of books, beautiful pieces of work have been written to help liberate the human from their suffering, to help take them from 0 to 100, okay? As Plato said, there's 3 levels. You've got the bottom, the middle, and the top. That's the divided line, okay? And what philosophy does, it takes you from the bottom and takes you into the middle, so you are in a state of neither pleasure or pain. And philosophy or literature or beauty takes you into the higher echelons of thinking. And what do we call that? Contemplation, intellectual aesthetics. Someone who can think of the world in whole, dissect, break down, differentiate beauty from ugly, pain from joy. Because if we can't differentiate, life turns into this big cloudy ball of dust, Okay? And how can we do that? Well, first of all, teachers. I'm a teacher. I'm talking to you now, teachers. You cannot be a teacher if you're passionless. It's a crime against humanity to do this. You cannot walk into the classroom and say, I am a teacher just because I need to pay some bills. No, you cannot do this. You have to be passionate. Why? Because you determine the conditioning of the child's relationship to literature, to beauty, to books. Okay? If you make books and lessons boring and mundane, they'll grow up thinking books are mundane and boring. You, with your passionless nature, is electrocuting the child, as Huxley presented in A Brave New World, okay? If you, as a teacher, if the education system keeps reinforcing that the world is dangerous, the world is scary, nature is this, nature is that, if you go into the forest, this will happen, if you go do this, you are electrocuting the child, you're destroying their relationship with the natural world. Many people in England are scared to go solo traveling by themselves. Why? I'll leave that to you. But how can we change this? Well, passionate teachers is for sure. But we also need to claim back the world of books and not let it still be held in the hands of the authority. Okay? We need an expansive book system now. If you dissociate yourself with nature and dissociate yourself with books, what else is going to get you out of your slumber? Honestly, it's not going to be technology. It certainly is not going to be money. And you wonder why there's a mental health epidemic for young people, that they disvalue books and they disvalue nature. And you're saying that's not true. They do value nature. They do value books. I watched a video another day on TikTok. It said the top 10 greatest books of all time, or top 10 books I suggest you read. Rich Dad, Poor Dad, Think and Grow Rich, The Atomic of Breaking Your Habits of Breaking Yourself, or whatever. The Secret. You're telling me the 10 greatest books in human history have been all written in the last 40 years, 30 years? Ridiculous. You've been conditioned to completely regard the classics as old, outdated. Trust me, pick up a Dostoevsky book and try not to let that book change you. Try pick up Plato's The Republic and not let that book change you. I promise you. And I would also say, for the young kids at school, we should stop giving them Shakespeare at 12. Stop giving them Dickens at 13 or 14, or Austen, or these kind of literary figures. You don't teach a 12-year-old atomic physics, do you? You don't teach them quantum mathematics at 15. And Shakespeare, Plato, that is the equivalent in the qualitative literature world. They're deep, very complex books. And we shouldn't overload them at such a young age with these books. They come later in life, where they take control of their education. This is a metaphor, this is a simile, disgraceful, conditioning them to not like it. Give them a quote, break down the life wisdom behind it, how it can relate to life. I once gave my class of students a quote and I loved it. It was by Machiavelli. It said, "Many see who you are, but few can touch. We humans live by the eye, but not by the hands." And I put that on the board. I promise you, their minds were blown. I've never seen such engagement. But you slap a poem by, I don't know, Ben Jonson, and I say, here's a simile, here's a metaphor, here's a personification. And then 20 years later, you say to them, oh, do you like Wordsworth? Do you like Ben Jonson? Do you like Keats? Oh, that stuff is so boring. You see how they don't return back to the source itself? It's like a child who couldn't swim and had a scare of drowning at 6 years old, never returns to swimming again. But that one was by accident. This one is by purpose. And why? And why do they do this conditioning? Why? Well, first of all, you can't have too many intellectuals. Also, why is this conditioning going on? Well, it keeps intellectual matters out of the majority into the minority. And I'm coming across as a bit of a Marxist here, but I'm not a Marxist. I like to take Marx's thoughts because he helps separate the sugar from the salt. That's what's really good about his ideas. But sometimes too much salt and too much sugar, we know the consequences of that, eh? In essence, what I'm basically calling out for in this video is that we need to break the cycle. If you have little brothers and sisters and cousins and they associate boredom and mundaneness with books, it's your job, it's your responsibility at home, as a family, and in love to help foster passion and a connection with the books they are reading, okay? And it's not just any book, it's all books, okay? You can't let them have this relationship. If they find nature scary and dangerous and they say, oh, can we go out and wander? And can we go out and explore? And you go, no, it's dangerous. You are contributing to this conditioning. If they say, oh, I want to read this book. Can you buy me this book? What shall I read? And you even say, nah, books are boring. Don't read that. If you are sitting in front of them on your phone, swapping on the iPad, watching reels and TikToks, you need to stop doing it because you are the role model. We have to be a new president for this. We can't say, government, change this, government, change that. We need to be the ones who do this kind of things, you know? We need to be the ones to break the cycle ourselves. I'm sick of this now. We always ask the authorities to change. And the authorities, they do this, okay. And they move on. They don't care. It's up to us. We must take responsibility for this, okay? So if you're sitting there, break the connection. If they say, let's go out and wander, and can we go out into the forest? Don't go, it's dangerous. Say, yeah, one day we can. It's beautiful. Let them always associate nature as beautiful and good and great, and always let them associate books and literature and learning as great and productive and beautiful and liberating. Because at the end of the day, as human beings, we live all a life full of suffering and pain. The present moment is always an ever fleeting thing. One day you're having fun, the next day you're not. Life always feels bland and boring, okay? And nature and literature and knowledge and learning takes you out of this. You're not swimming in your own sick anymore, okay? You're cleaning yourself. And one famous quote I love, I don't know who said it, but it said, a pig can't clean itself in its own muck. Also, and maybe I want to add another social conditioning element, is history too. It's not just books in English. They've done this in history as well. History is a beautiful way of making you fly high into the sky and seeing society from the top. You see, the Roman period, the Ottoman period, this happened because this shifted here. History allows you to become an eagle and to look down upon what you're seeing, okay? But it's essentially a top-down perspective. And now poetry is the bottom-up perspective. Now, instead of looking from the mountains or from the skies of what society was like, poetry and literature allows you to get onto the ground and intermingle. So when you read Crime and Punishment, you really are stepping into 19th century Russia. You're feeling the values, the energy, the religious doctrines, the norms of the time. In other words, if you can become so well versed in history and literature, you understand human nature much better. You see our flaws and our flaws and our greatnesses, okay? And if you, again, electrocute from a young age to find history boring, literature boring, how would you ever think for yourself? I mean, we live in a world of quantitative data. The numbers speak for everything nowadays, but we have neglected the qualitative. And the qualitative, in essence, could be much harder, because it requires you to think, not just record. Anyway, thank you for today. That's me signing out. Like, subscribe, and comment. This is the Lyceum Podcast.